Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Happy summer to both of you. We're back after a slight delay, but I think that, absence makes the heart grow fonder. At least it does mine when I see you two smiling at me through a computer screen, ready to record a Mockingcast. How goes it so far? How are you guys surviving?
Loving it. We just spent a whole week at church camp as a family, and I didn't have to cook or clean for like literally 6 days.
That is awesome.
Awesome. Our salt content's through the roof because it was like memo food, but that's fine. I don't have to cook it. You know?
Your salt content. You guys are both very
you're all on
bloated.
every
blood
meal
pressure
was
medication now, but except for that, you're fine.
Every meal was bacon or cake. Like, I'm going to have bacon or cake. Like, every
Or
meal.
both. Or bacon cake.
Both.
Bacon
it was
cake.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Rucker?
Doing good, especially now that our air conditioning is fixed.
What?
Yeah. Air conditioning went out for 3 days. Luckily, it rained a few days, so that was good. But then Friday afternoon went back on, and my wife and I were just like, we had forgotten how amazing air conditioning is. Mm-hmm. I mean, can you imagine living in Houston before this? Anyway, that's all I'll say.
I don't think anybody did.
So we're now back to our first world problems have been solved, and we are now back to living a life of luxury. So
is that a first world problem? I don't know. I mean, air conditioning in Houston.
I mean, like I said, what percentage of the world's population has reliable air conditioning? It is not
true.
a high percentage.
It's true.
You know?
Hashtag blessed and highly favored.
Exactly. Sweet.
Sarah.
So that's where we're headed today. This is going to be the power hour with Sarah Condon.
As fascinating as RJ's
HVAC issues,
AC problems are, your HVAC problems are, let's talk more broadly about summer expectations, because summer vacation, summer itself, I think has morphed quite a bit in the last, decade or so. Kind of everyone seems to be stressed about summer. And Carrie Willard, our own Carrie Willard, wrote something about this for the site. She said, "For the first time in recent memory, my kids are at loose ends this summer. As a parent who works full-time, each summer I've relied on a complex network of expensive day camps and activities to keep them supervised and occupied. But recently we hit the jackpot of having grandparents who are local, in good health, and actually want to spend time with their grandkids." And by the way, that third one is a big one. This means no... I mean, I don't speak from personal experience, actually, but I've watched a lot of this happen. This means no more color-coordinated camp t-shirts or field trip permission forms or sunscreen before 9 a.m. This means swimming and laziness and popsicles. This also means, for Carrie, she says, my achievement meter is feeling a bit wonky. Because with day camps, my children receive awards at the end of every week. Every week. The first week that they attended these camps, there was a tumbleweed stampede theme. One child got the Obedient Cowboy Award, and the other got the Cool, Calm, Collected Cowboy Award. Let's face it, those awards were more for the parents who pay for camp than the campers themselves. Hey, Mom, I got the Obedient Cowboy Award.
That's an oxymoron, but continue.
A little bit. And so the lack of day camps and lack of schedules has left me feeling a bit at loose ends, too, as a parent. Grateful but unmoored. If there's nobody telling me that my kid is an obedient cowboy, how am I even parenting them? Enter The Atlantic's review of David Epstein's new book, Range, a counterpoint to the Tiger Mom and Grit tomes that have been published in the last decade. This one apparently gives parents permission and even encouragement to allow their children to quit something they've started. Epstein points to research that has shown that quitting something that's unrewarding or unfulfilling and moving on to something that's a better fit makes people happier. Now, that doesn't mean my kids are going to get to play video games all summer, Carrie writes, without picking up a book, but it has affirmed my countercultural attitude of loosening my grip on the reins of summer. This is secular relief in the face of little L laws that govern privileged parenting. This glimpse of grace is as much for me, the hand-wringing parent, as it is for the kid who just wants to stay in pajamas until noon. We get precious little time to spend with our kids when they're not being observed, corrected, and gritted into submission. Have you guys come up against this? The fact that summer does not actually mean rest and relaxation. It means a time to sort of optimize their opportunities and, if anything, maybe to optimize your rest and to rest extremely efficiently, or just to make sure your kids are nonstop occupied and never idle. Is that, leading question.
This is the first summer I haven't done writing prompts. I've done like the past couple of years, I'll do like, so before you can do this or that, all the fun stuff, like you have to do like a writing prompt, or you have to, there was like a list of chores, and we just all hated each other so much, and no one was a better writer by the end of the summer. And I just had to let go of a lot of that stuff. And I don't know why this summer I've suddenly done that, but I have. I liked Carrie's piece because, to me, like, summer is actually the last season of rest we have in America, right? Like, we've given all the rest of it up. We've made Christmas miserable. Thanksgiving involves a lot of family. That gets miserable. And it's also like, so we've taken the rest away, and we've like now created just another version of New Year's or Lent or, whatever sort of, we're going to get it right this time. We're going to start over. We're going to, we're going to optimize, refresh, and renew sort of thing. And our family experience has just been like, that leads to misery. And so, so my kids have watched, we're only like 2 weeks into summer, and they have watched like the whole library of Ninja Turtles at this point. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Like, I'm just like, I guess they're just going to get dumb this summer, and I'm okay with it. I don't know.
Well, RJ, how about you? Are you feeling the pressure to maximize summer? Are you relaxed as it appears?
Sarah, you talked about writing prompts, and I started to get really self-righteous, but then I realized last summer, maybe the past 2 summers, we were definitely doing some test prep work with the kids, like ACT prep, IC prep, things like that, as they're getting prepared to apply for high school and college, which were, variously, effective, I guess. But the thought I had about this was, we have 2 pretty different kids. Our older kid really likes to stay busy. And so I think, was it 3 summers ago, we had a pretty low-key summer, and I think he was pretty bored, and then the past 2 summers, we've actually somehow we've taken some pretty fun trips, actually, as a family, which most of us have loved. But this summer, we don't really have hardly anything planned. And suddenly our 14-year-old, who, as I've shared, the puberty is strong with that one, is saying this is like the best summer ever. He's sleeping until like noon, and he's playing video games and hanging out with his friends and doing a little bit of swim team. And he doesn't want to he just wants to hang out with his friends and be around and chill. But he seems a little lighter and happier. And he's also into high school. He doesn't have to worry about applying to anything next year, which is good. But so this is, I think, turning out to be, it could be a pretty chill summer, pretty achievement-free summer. But I guess I'm not feeling terribly anxious about it. But you have to ask my kids how anxious they're feeling about it.
I do think there's a difference between ACT prep and me having a 6-year-old who's just learned to write doing writing prompts, just to name it. You know what I mean?
You saying that.
I do think there's a difference. Like, yeah, it's, and I think what you're saying about, that's such a great thing when you know your kids really well, because I just love a second-born. Our second-born's the same way. Like, she could just hang out and snuggle all day. She ain't got to go nowhere. She don't need nothing. You know what I mean? I think there's something really beautiful when a family has a child like that, because it actually reminds you to rest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did I share with you what Jackson said recently? Did I share that 2 weeks ago? He said this to my mom was here visiting, and they were staying up late, just the two of them, watching TV one night. I mean, Jack has gone a lot because he has a car with his friends, but he's actually been hanging out a little bit this summer, which is amazing. And at some point, he just turned 17. He turned to my mom, probably like midnight, and he goes, "It is so nice not to be angry all the time anymore." You know, and what a comfort that was, because it seems like, you know, kids, maybe, I mean, I only know about boys, I'm sure girls too, 13, 14, such a hard age, so much anger. But now to see my 17-year-old be like, I'm out of it. I'm out of it. I feel lighter. I feel happier. I feel that was a tremendous, a little word of grace in the midst of kind of another child who sometimes seems happy and sometimes not. So anyway, phases.
No, I definitely get sad. We can talk about children, but for the non-parents out there, I mean, all of us are afflicted by this. And you talk to adults, no matter if they have kids or not, and you ask them how their summer went, and that what you'll always hear, at least today, is you'll hear the same thing you hear any other time. It was busy.
It was busy.
Full.
Yeah.
It was good but full.
Yeah.
That's the sort of nicer way to say it. It just flew by. There was also something at The Atlantic recently about work-life balance and how that all of our talk about work-life balance, Olga Kazan was writing about it. She said that it's become, for sort of type A people in America, instead of it becoming like permission to have a home life, it's become, you start to feel like you're failing at both.
Yeah.
Both at working and at resting, and rest becomes something you then have to kind of master or win. And when rest becomes this thing that's got a premium on it, like that we even know that you'll even if it's promoted as a hack to more productivity, if you rest better and you sleep more. I mean, all of a sudden people are really anxious about how they're not resting well enough, and that's the irony of ironies. And You see a lot. I think you do see a lot of the kind of seculosity of leisure in the summer, and how the cult of productivity has taken over, and that we feel like even if it is rest that we're trying to optimize, that becomes a new thing that we're failing at or measuring or something like that. And at the same time, I'm also looking at college kids who, instead of having a college job being a lifeguard, they now have 2 internships and then a family vacation at a nice place. And it's, I don't know where it all ends, but I do know that it's a setup for a whole lot of enoughness and all this stuff. And it brings me back to that great Calvin and Hobbes collection, The Days Are Just Packed, which is all about summer vacation. And like, can you believe how much nothing we get to do this summer? I always love that. It's like Calvin and Hobbes is like, that we better get outside and start doing nothing as soon as possible. And I'm all in favor of that, even though here I am on a late afternoon recording a podcast when it's beautiful outside. But tell me more, Sarah. Were you about to say something?
I was just thinking about I was thinking about this last week that we had at a church camp where it's the local camp for the Episcopal Church. And if you volunteer to do morning prayer and evening prayer, you get to stay for free, and they feed you, and you're in a cabin, and there really wasn't anything to do. And I said to my husband today, we took a walk together, and we've got like a real vacation, quote unquote, real vacation planned in July. But I was like, I actually think the best part of the summer is going to be these past 5 days we had where we were just together and a little bored, and we watched some American Ninja Warrior,
Yes.
it's like, it was really not like, we didn't see anything special. We didn't get on an airplane, and it was just, but it was just really, really lovely. So
sometimes there's a tendency in the church world to complain about people that just stop coming to church in the summer.
Yeah.
But I've found over the years, it's a way to almost continue to observe a little bit of that. Sabbath is the wrong word, but you don't have summer vacation anymore. But working for a church, we all find it to be such a relief. There's sometimes pressure for us to continue lots of programming during the summer. But the rector here, our boss, he's basically saying, no, we need to stop. Anything that we're doing, we'll do Sunday services and like one midweek communion thing, but that is it.
That's it.
And he encourages people to knock off early and to really enjoy. And the pace, just the whole level of things. I know that not, if you're trying to meet a deadline or your quarterly goals or something like that, then not everything has that ability, but maybe there's something countercultural about the church and that we still get to observe a little of that. It used to be that, priests at big churches would go away from basically Memorial Day to Labor Day, and then And I could see why that would be important, spiritually speaking, to get a break from all of the need and transference and
whatever could you mean, David?
You come back actually wanting to be there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's talking about let's just just go straight into more performance anxiety, and let's talk about
Yes.
That's the new name for the podcast. We're just going to call it performance anxiety. Buckle up.
Performanceism. Let's talk about performanceism. You accomplished something great. So now what? By A.C. Shilton. This appeared in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. And she begins by saying, you finally did it. You got the promotion, secured the raise, finished the project, or otherwise leveled up in your career. It's a wonderful feeling of accomplishment. You should be proud. But then you come down from that high and reality starts to sink in. Where do you go from here? And she goes in to talk about the Arrival Fallacy. I wrote something about this on the site recently, but the Arrival Fallacy is the illusion that once we make it, once we attain our goal or reach our destination, we will reach lasting happiness. Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar says that the arrival fallacy is the reason some Hollywood stars struggle with mental health issues and substance abuse later in life. These individuals start out unhappy, but they say to themselves, it's okay because when I make it, then I'll be happy, Dr. Ben-Shahar says. But then they make it, and while they may feel briefly fulfilled, the feeling doesn't last. This time they're unhappy, but more than that, they're unhappy without hope, because before they lived on the illusion, well, the false hope, that once they make it, then they'll be happy. Shilton goes on to write, the problem is that achievement doesn't equal happiness, at least not over the long term. But this isn't a message that most of us are familiar with. In fact, it's almost antithetical to the American dream, which tells us that hard work and achievement deliver a happy life. Instead, according to the experts, the number one predictive of happiness is quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. In other words, relationships. If relationships make us happy, the fact that many of us neglect our relationships in pursuit of career success may further squelch our joy. And so, Shilton concludes, you should banish any sentences like this. I'll be happy if I can just achieve X, Y, or Z. So there is something called the arrival fallacy, and we talk about this in using other language about sort of the not being justified according to works of little L law or what have you, the futility of ladder climbing. But here you have the arrival fallacy, this idea that once I just achieve X, Y, or Z, well, then I'll be happy, or then I will be fulfilled or justified or what have you. What do you think about the article, you two?
I liked this because it strangely resonated with something I read this morning. I read every day. I read the Writer's Almanac, Garrison Keillor, obviously. And he did a whole thing. He does these little histories about writers, and he did one today that I loved about Leo Tolstoy that I didn't know. So I just pulled it up because I wanted to read just a little bit of it because it so resonated with us because they were talking about this being sort of a new problem, but it's not. So it says he was 52 years old and his two greatest novels, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, were behind him. He had found himself in a crisis. He was famous, had a family and land and money, but it all seemed empty. He was unable to write, had trouble sleeping, contemplated suicide. He read the great philosophers, but found holes in all of their arguments. He was amazed that the majority of ordinary Russians managed to keep themselves going every day, and he finally decided it must be their faith. From there, it was a short time until Tolstoy took a walk in the woods and found God. He wrote, "At the thought of God, happy waves of life welled up inside me. Everything came alive, took on meaning. The moment I thought I knew God, I lived. But the moment I forgot him, the moment I stopped believing, I also stopped living." So I really loved that. And there's a it goes on to, isn't that very powerful?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I'd never heard that before.
And it goes on to talk about how he then went all in Christian and wanted to dress like a peasant and wanted to give away all his money to the poor people. And his wife was like, excuse me, I like our lifestyle. So it's very funny. And he actually makes this pilgrimage to a monastery and he's going to do it like one of the people. And he doesn't realize how long it's been since he's walked long distances in whatever shoes they had back then. And so he had to take the train back home because he had done some damage.
I think after that, he wrote the short story Father Sergius, which is kind of about some of this stuff.
Oh, cool.
And unbelievable, but I had never heard that distillation.
It's such a great conversion story, but it really speaks to this thing that we all have where it's well, if I just do this, then I'll be happy, right? And then For me, I mean, I think I think hitting this age where like you have sort of that, whatever you thought you've kind of landed, right? You've got the kids and the husband, or you don't, and that's okay too. And that's where you've landed as well. But you kind of imagined this happiness that would come out of that. And when you arrive there, and it's different. It doesn't feel the same way. I don't know. I was at the pool yesterday. We obviously spent a lot of time at the pool here in Houston, our neighborhood pool. And there was this couple, and they were on a bench together, and they were like at that age where like you're just so beautiful. Like they were like 17, and they're like all arms and legs like intertwined, like talking to each other on a bench. And I was just like, my God, like they are so gorgeous and like are about to face the world, and like everything's going to change and everything's going to fall apart and everything's going to come back together. And I was saying this to my husband today, and he goes, yes, and they haven't even had to deal with accomplishment yet. And, like adult accomplishment and what that means and sort of what the fallout from that is. And it's just, accomplishment is such, I mean, I love what they say here about how we are a goal-oriented species, because I think sometimes when I talk about Mockingbird, people are like, so you just don't do anything, Like we're goal-oriented. We know that, and they actually say in the piece this thing that I've seen certainly in ministry, where I see priests retire early and they're dead in like 2 years. I mean, that's a very common thing.
Well, a lot of men retire and either immediately have heart attacks or become alcoholics.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so there is something to the doing that's important, but I just think when we identify with the doing or with the goal and maybe not with the process, I mean, I hate to romanticize monastic stuff, although Tolstoy is definitely in a monastery, but I always think about that. I'm not going to remember who it was, but it's one of the mystic sort of people talked about God being in the pots and pans. There's just like this like thing in the doing that's so beautiful.
Well, his book, that short story, which is not very short, the novella Father Sergius, is about he tries about a monk who tries to basically be the most hardcore monk ever, and he's cannot, by his own will and effort, actually save himself or quiet his soul.
Take that, Pelagius.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, we're about to get into that, but I think that, as I love that line that she writes when she says, "This is not something." This isn't a message most of us are familiar with. That happiness and achievement aren't actually attached, and there is the problem of success, just like there's the problem of failure, and it's the reason why some people are deeply afraid of failure and some people are deeply afraid of success, because there's a flip side to it, and it's not just like Eddie Vedder kind of I don't want to be made to compromise or something like that, but the problem of people who seem to have it all together or seem to be, really high achievers is that they're unbelievably deeply familiar with this dynamic, that the next, every time you hit that rung. And I happen to think, I mean, how could we not think of that documentary Free Solo, where this guy, this rock climber who's amazing, slightly psychotic individual, climbs up the Half Dome without in Yosemite without a rope. And it's like the most dangerous thing ever. And he does it. He finds out the whole movie's about kind of leading up to this moment. And the second he does it, he's sort of like, well,
felt good for about 5 minutes.
What I'm going to do next, and the Arrival Fallacy. The movie might as well be called the Arrival Fallacy. On with rocks. RJ, what do you think?
It's not as catchy a title.
No,
the Arrival Fallacy with rocks.
Why don't they consult me on this stuff? RJ?
Well, it made me thankful that I've never actually tried to accomplish anything. So I just that's a joke. But I think what they said about the more you focus on how happy you are, the less happy you're going to be, right? Like, I mean, Jesus was onto something when he said, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your span of life? Do not worry, for every day is enough troubles of its own. And I do find in those moments when I'm able to live in the present, there's tremendous freedom in that. And sometimes it sucks and sometimes it's great. But the ability to live there and tell the truth about whatever it is that you're going through, there's freedom in that too, especially, if you have people that care about you, that love you, are willing to listen to you, engage with you. Yeah, so I just totally agree. I agree with that. And I think, I don't know, setting goals versus shooting for achievements, like, yeah, okay, we all have things we think are important, but I do think what probably is most important, that whatever it is you find yourself doing, trying to enjoy it as best you can. And then also, I think what the whole Tolstoy thing goes to is remembering that you're not that important at the end of the day, that you're small. What did your dad used to say, Dave, in the midst of the financial crisis? I don't want to be too big to fail. I want to be too small to fail. That's true, that there's freedom in smallness.
There's relief.
There's relief, and that's what Tolstoy had to get to. He became very big and very important and very successful and very bound. And suddenly he discovers God and discovers that he's going to die, and it's not that big of a deal, and he's not that important. And there's tremendous freedom in that. It's a little bit like how nice it is that Seinfeld went to his little comedians in cars and coffee and his stupid little American Express ads, and even Conan. After Conan lost the Tonight Show and the great speech he gave at Dartmouth, and they continue to do what they did before, but it wasn't quote unquote as good as the other thing they did, but it didn't keep them from creating and engaging in the things they love for their own sake.
Funny. I mean, RJ, you and I were
making millions of dollars doing it.
You and I were youth ministers together for a number of years.
Yes, we were.
This is kind of a refrain. This Arrival Fallacy, at least it was a refrain in our youth ministry.
Yes.
This idea that you telling kids, sort of deconstructing on the front end a little bit of their ambition. I thought it was a healthy thing. Of course, it matters almost not at all in the actual, once you get into the system of needing to get the next gold stamp on your, passport or your resume. But this idea that, once, if you make $1 million, you're going to be thinking about the next million and all this stuff. And you can say it up front, and yet you can still fall prey to it. And this is the Romans 7 moment of, we can know this stuff to be deeply true because everyone's life basically attests to the Arrival Fallacy. And Christians have their own version of it. And I'm almost embarrassed by this because I wrote about it in the wake of, I'm feeling a little bit of that. I don't even know if I should use the phrase what do you call it?
Postpartum depression.
Postpartum after the book came out, and feeling that it's like, I was really excited for a little while and seeing all this, getting all this validation, but then it's sort of done and it's over and I'm still who I am and what's next, and that wasn't enough, and what is going to be enough, and even though I just written a book about enoughness not being something you can grab. And so here I am in my this very small scale experiencing the irony of Romans 7 in a moment.
David also reminded me, I don't know if you remember, but you and I and Mark Choi, who's a wonderful Presbyterian minister now, who also worked with us in youth ministry, hung out late one night after our ministries had sort of come to an end, and we're talking about what did we actually accomplish. And the answer was we had no idea. Here we'd been working combined probably 15 years in 3 different places with hundreds and hundreds of kids. But what could you actually point to and say, I accomplished that? And it was the conclusion we reached was, we'll know later. Maybe we'll see some fruit. Maybe when we get to the kingdom, we only really know in the kingdom. And at the end of the day, of course, we didn't accomplish it anyway. God accomplished it, and we were fortunate to be part of his work in the world. But I think that's important to say, especially to anyone, but maybe especially to people who are in ministry. It's not like you can point to a spreadsheet and be like, I increased the bottom line or something. I guess you could say there are more people coming than there were before, but what is that? Who knows what that means? It's very difficult to measure. In some ways, I don't want to say ministry is definitely not immune from that, but it does feel tougher to quantify than maybe other things. Is that?
Yeah, well, the upside is that you do get people coming into your life 15, 16 years later who you had some impact on that you had no idea. Yes. And they're telling you something you did or something you said, and you're like, wait, what?
What? Exactly.
And at the time you thought that you were
it was a throwaway line, or you don't remember it. Yeah.
Enough kids to camp or something like that. And in fact, nothing, a lot of that just increased their own, I think of Joshua Harris in that book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and what he thought he was accomplishing and what he was accomplishing were 2 different things. And yet
or
maybe
Veggie Tales, right? That guy did the same thing. And Keurigs. It's a list.
The Arrival Fallacy is everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
I said this, I said this a little bit earlier, but I do want to, this is the reason why Mockingbird exists, is because of this phenomenon. Because people often say to me, they really will say, like, you don't encourage people. I've sat in Bible studies before and sort of talked about this kind of theology. Well, goal setting's important, people will say to me. Like, we have to have things that we're going to do, and we have to have things we're going to accomplish. And, basically you're telling me not to do this. And my response to that is, would that we could tell people not to do this. Would that it were possible that we could tell people not to manically set goals, think about what they're doing the next day, think about their failures and accomplishments. Like, that's why Mockingbird exists on some level, because it's like innately, like in a cellular level, a part of who we are, right?
Yes.
So I need to say that about this piece, that's why we talk about stuff like that, because, we're a lot of us are on the other side of some of this stuff. I mean, I think a lot of us have faced failure in our work life or faced accomplishment and the emptiness that comes afterwards. And I don't know. I think it's necessary. So.
Well, gosh. I mean, I think that you also, when you hear banish any sentences like, I'll be happy if I can just achieve X, the reason such sentences exist are not because they sound catchy. It's because that's how the law works.
Right.
If I can do this, then that will occur.
Right.
Then
Action,
it puts
consequence.
it puts me in control. Makes me the subject.
If you just eat
object.
this fruit, your eyes will be opened, and then you will be like God.
And that is, unfortunately, there are consequences, and we can engineer certain things. But the gospel comes into being, as we've talked about many times. It's when willpower fails, and when and sometimes when willpower fails is when you've actually achieved the thing, and you realize it didn't actually. The then part. The if part worked, the then part didn't actually deliver.
Guess what? You still have your childhood. You know what I mean? It's like, seriously, it's like the SNL skit that everybody sent you, Dave, about the vacation. You know what I mean? Like you can go on this vacation, but the travel agency or the vacation, organization wants to remind you that your life won't be better when you get back. Like that your marriage will
Was that the Adam
fall
Sandler
apart.
trip to Italy one?
Yeah.
Oh my
if
God,
you're
that was
sad
so good.
in Mamaroneck, you might still be sad in Italy.
It's so good.
I mean, that's the greatest. That is one of the greatest. I think illustrations. I used that at the beginning of a sermon recently, actually about this very thing.
Totally.
Because it hits so close to home. Because summer is the time when we think, if I can get away, I can, and there's certain things vacation can do.
But they can't fix that.
But you can't. What does he say? If we can take you on a hike. We cannot make you into someone who enjoys hiking. Or the best one is, we can take you to a wine tasting. We cannot change why you drink or the person you become when you do.
Adam Sandler. Oh, God,
That's
love
so
him.
genius.
My wife just is in love with Adam Sandler, but anyway, it's neither here nor
Well, guys, how about this segue?
Yes.
Talking, speaking of the law in practice, let's get to this remarkable commencement address that Senator Joshua Hawley, the Missouri senator, gave to students at King's College in New York. And it was published under the title, The Age of Pelagius. And this is a U.S. senator saying this.
We are living in the age of Pelagius.
Yeah. He gave us a crash course in Pelagianism, which is one of our great, punching bags on Mockingbird. In fact,
Yes.
semi-Pelagianism is. We'll get to that, but here's how he just describes it, because I thought it's very good. Pelagius is a 4th century monk, held that the individual possessed a powerful capacity for achievement. In fact, he believes individuals could achieve their own salvation. Since perfection is possible for man, it is obligatory, is how he put it. The key was will and effort. No summers off, people. If individuals worked hard enough and deployed their talents wisely enough, they could indeed be perfect. This idea famously drew the ire of Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine, who responded that we humans are not achievement machines. We are fragile. We are fallible. We suffer weakness and need, and we all stand in need of God's grace. But Pelagius was not satisfied. He took his stand on an idea of human freedom. He responded that God gave individuals free choice, that we could use that free choice to adopt our own purposes, to fix our own destinies, to create ourselves, if you like. A disciple of Pelagius named Julian of Eclanum said that freedom of choice is that by which man is, quote unquote, emancipated from God. If you listen closely, now here's where he makes this turn. If you listen closely, you can hear Pelagianism almost everywhere, in our fiction, in our film, in our school curricula, and self-help books. It even features prominently in our law, the civil law. The Pelagian view says that the individual is most free when he or she is most alone, able to choose his or her own way without interference. Family and tradition, neighborhood and church, these things get in the way of uninhibited free choice. And now this Pelagian idea of freedom is one our cultural leaders have embraced for decades. Here's the paradox. For all the big talk about individual freedom, Pelagian philosophy has made American society more hierarchical and has made it more elitist. This is no accident. Pelagius himself was most popular with the old senatorial families of Rome, the wealthy, the well-connected, the aristocrats. They were his patrons. And why? He validated their privilege and their power. Because if freedom means choice among options, then the people with the most choices are the most free, and that means the rich. And if salvation is about achievement, then those with the most accolades are righteous, and that means the elite and the strong. Fundamentally, Pelagius misunderstood the cross. The cross of Christ announces the weakness and need of every person. He quotes Corinthians here. And that means it excludes the boasting and the pride of the few. The cross says the talented, the well-born, the well-educated do not deserve special privileges. They are not more valuable than anyone else. The call of God comes to every person, and the power of God is poured out on all who believe. Now, he goes on and he extrapolates quite a bit, of course, in what I would call a predictably partisan direction, though I think the Pelagianism very much afflicts all sides of the coin. When it comes to self-salvation, liberals and conservatives, they each have their own form of self-salvation, and in fact, self-invention, self-creation. But what he gets at here is the kind of toxicity of this idea that of the free will, and that God helps those who help themselves. This is the great kind of American mantra, and I don't really think it's the American mantra so much as the human mantra. But I was struck by it and wanted to know first, what are your gut reactions to this commencement address?
Yeah, so for me, I read this and it reminded me so much of the piece actually that we talked about in the last podcast. The only places on the streets that understand that the Dave, I think you put this together. This piece from The Guardian that the journalist wrote, the people who challenged my atheism most were drug addicts and prostitutes. I mean, I wonder when the piece will come out, and maybe it's been written, and maybe this is kind of that piece, but where we talk about how being an atheist is actually just being super, 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 I won't use the F word, but I want to, privileged. It's just being super privileged to be atheist. Because you're able to say, I have autonomy and I have control and I can make these decisions and I can feel good about myself and I can earn these things and accomplish these things, and therefore, like, God doesn't exist. And so, Pelagianism meets sort of like American atheism they're very similar to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an atheist there's like a sorrowful atheist who says, like a John Gray who says, I am bound, I am terrible, but I still look at the universe and see nothing but chaos. And yet I think most of what I agree with you 100%. And I think it's like almost like a taboo that what we're talking about is sort of, this is, here Pelagius was very, very popular among the privileged for whom it validated their own accomplishment.
I mean, I want to be sensitive. Like, I think people who are grappling with unbelief is one thing. I think that is one thing. And I think seeing the world and the chaos that it's in is one thing. And I am very empathetic to that, and certainly have my own moments where I'm like, you want to talk about the story of a God who died and rose on our behalf, and suddenly you start sounding like a zombie movie with a weird theological bent, and you're like, wait, what am I believing? Like, I understand people navigating that, but I see so much less of that in the world, and I see so much more of like, blessed by the universe, like feeling good making my own choices, check out my succulents on my Instagram feed. Like that's actually Pelagianism, and that's actually atheism, and we see that actually in Christian circles all the time. So anyway, that's kind of the atheism I'm speaking to.
Yeah, and this is how the means by which man is emancipated from God. In fact, and that was a situation in which belief was sort of, a default. So there was no even sense of that. But it really is. If I can be perfect, what need do I have of God? And yet you have the testimony of all of these lesser thans and all of these, also rans and failures saying actually, and addicts at AA meetings and things like that saying actually the where you meet God is not in the place of your succulents, but in the place when your phone has you don't have a phone. None of these people that Arnade is talking about in that piece actually have that, and I think it's something that we need to. Explore delicately but honestly. But RJ, what are you thinking?
I just want to know more about Josh Hawley. I was like, who is this guy, and where did he hear this message? He's from, I guess he's from Missouri. So maybe is he LCMS? Maybe he is. Maybe this is where he heard about this. But it's because, like you said, we here have our own little niche where we talk about things like Pelagianism and semipelagianism. But these are not part of the public discourse, even like in the church, except when there was some Episcopalian theologian a few years back who wanted to reinstate Pelagius. Do you remember that, Sarah?
Yes.
Yeah. I remember when that happened. I was like, oh, sweet. Okay, awesome. Didn't happen.
I mean, half of them are low key about it still, so let's not act like it's a big deal.
But that's the whole thing when everyone is low key about it. Because it's so alluring. It's a control mechanism, right? It's for controlling yourself. It's for controlling other people. It's action consequence. It seems to work in the short term. The alternative is terrifying, right? That you actually have no control over anything
it's
at
terrifying.
all, and you are hopelessly lost. And let me just say it, you have no free will. That was the essence of the debate between Augustine and Pelagius. But, it's sort of, quote unquote, dehumanizing to a degree in terms of our vision of what it means to be a human. And yet, as I think Gerhard Ford has said, that God's goal is to take us unhappy little gods and make us into true humans. And part of what it means to be a true human is what Leo Tolstoy discovered, which is you're not that important and you don't have that many choices.
Right.
And there's someone bigger than you and more important than you. But guess what? Also, you're loved. Right. That essence loves you enough to die for you. And as you guys were talking about, I don't know where I thought about this, but what I think when I've talked about people who are more universalist, in their outlook, that maybe not atheist, but universalist, all paths are equally valid. I'm like, well, if that's true, then Jesus died for nothing, absolutely nothing. And you can make up all sorts of alternate explanations, but don't tell me that my Lord died for nothing, because I know he didn't. I know, So Dave, what are you going to say?
Well, no, I think that one of the things we're saying here is that straight up Pelagianism, when it comes out, is usually a fault. Today, it's expressed almost always.
Yes.
Always. Real Pelagianism is sort of expressed as, I think, it's just straight up atheism. I feel it's sort of materialism. That means that I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of secular humanism, which is the umbrella under which unbelief sort of at least functions a lot of the time, all entails a high anthropology, a high view of human autonomy, agency, and capability. But then within the church, what thrives is something we call semi-Pelagianism. And, for the sake of our listeners, let me read to you how we define it on Mockingbird on the site, because I think it really describes the American church, and its result, I think, is oftentimes true unbelief in the very the kind that we were talking about earlier, Sarah. Semi-Pelagian constitutes a more mixed and prevalent view than Pelagianism. It understands the sovereignty of God and human effort as working together toward human salvation. You may have heard it in terms of meeting God halfway, or co-laboring with God, or God knocks at the door and I answer, or let go and let God, or even God helps those who help themselves. Semi-Pelagianism is seductive.
Ben Franklin.
It's seductive because it appeals to our sinful desire to stand on our own 2 feet while still throwing God a bone. See, we desperately want to play a part.
God, don't want your bones.
Keep it going. Let's keep it going. It's good.
We desperately want to play a part in the salvation tango. The problems here should be fairly self-evident. Questions of exactly how much of a role we play and how we know we've done so successfully plague the semi-Pelagian, fostering the sort of anxiety and judgment that eventually drives people away from Christianity altogether. Have I done enough? I know God loves me. I know God is sovereign, but wait, it's up to me to respond. How much have I responded? I used to respond, but now I'm not less responsive. I thought I had responded, but now I realize I was just being self-involved. That is to say, in practice, semi-Pelagianism has a tendency to revert to the non-semi version, so to full-blown Pelagianism. And what we are advocating for is the gospel, which says that God is God and we are not, and the cross announces that God works through weakness, failure, vulnerability. Guilt is where we are met.
We are loved in spite of our general
that's where faith is born, not in our ability to contribute, but in our lack of ability to contribute. Now, how that works out in some kind of and this can all become ways that things have become polemical and become new formulas for beating other people up, and yet. The truth that it ultimately captures is one that is of a gracious God who works in the lives of actual people, which are not the healthy 17-year-olds with their entwined legs with everything in front of them. As much as those, I want to be one of those people, but I want to be one of those people because I don't want to be confronted with how small and how limited I am.
You live with them though. We don't live with them yet, so I just remember.
Man.
I'm like, oh my
Sorry,
God,
I'm preaching. What else do you guys think about semi-Pelagianism? Which is a fancy word for a very
I think it also
common
what
thing.
what it really calls out is I'm going to say the correct way to engage with the Bible and with the teachings of Jesus in particular, which is you need to pay as much attention to how what Jesus says makes you feel as to what it makes you think. So when you read the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is sort of like, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, you got to think about, okay, let me go do that. What does that do to me? How do that Christianity, the gospel can be counterintuitive sometimes, and what sounds like it sounds good in your head can actually be deadly harmful in practice. Right, that's what of course, that's what he's saying. Pelagianism sounds great. Freedom, autonomy, empowerment, self-definition. Oh my gosh, it sounds amazing until you get cancer,
or you can't stop drinking,
or go bankrupt, or get unexpected. I don't know.
Or you yell at your kids every morning.
Exactly. So it sounds great in light of how we like to think about ourselves. But it's awful in terms of the way we actually live our lives. Whereas, the works of the cross, always appear. Well, anyway, I'm not going to quote Luther right now. But you need to pay attention to real life and what's actually going on in real life, and not your fantasy about how things should be or how someone else has told you they ought to be, but how they actually are in your lived experience and the experience of the people around you, because that's where God actually works, not in your mind, but in your life and your heart and your reality. Is that fair to say?
I love it. I'm honestly just wondering if I believe in semi-Pelagianism. I'm wondering.
That's a debate.
Because I just feel like, and I say this across the spectrum of Christianity, left to right, I just feel like once we enter into the territory of thinking of ourselves as co-creators with the risen Lord, do we still believe in the risen Lord? I mean, I think that's do we still believe in the power of what happened? Or have we taken just even 3% credit for it, and in doing that, aren't we undoing what has happened? So for me, that's a real question, and I think about that, sort of in some of the wishy-washy theology I see in mainline Protestantism, but I also think about it, and I hate to bring it up again, but succulents on Instagram, because there are these young women who say that they are Christian, and they may throw around words like Jesus and the Holy Ghost, but they're still taking credit for whatever's gone well in their life. They're still telling you, if you make these choices, then you're going to have this outcome. And at the moment you step into that territory, you can say Jesus on repeat, but you don't believe in him. So...
Yeah, I mean, I think semi-Pelagianism is much more nefarious, and that's why we try to do it. But of course, it can become its own form of semi-Pelagianism to be the person who calls out the semi-Pelagians.
I think the scariest thing is somebody who's an atheist and they don't realize they're an atheist. I mean, honestly, and that's the territory you start to enter into. So you better watch with those succulent pictures, ladies.
And to some degree, Sarah, obviously that's all of us, right? That each of us in our day-to-day existence lives as if there isn't a God who loves us, that it's up to us. We're in charge. We have to make the right choices. So it's the cross continues to be the sovereign one-way grace of God continues to be our only hope, even if we say that's what we believe in, because our lives tend to testify differently.
True. And it's a thing we have. That's why we have to be reminded of it constantly, because, as soon as things start to go well, I'm like, whoo, look at me, high cotton, and then it like...
Hot cotton?
High cotton.
Cotton.
And then it falls apart. We also have a dictionary on Mockingbird for the phrases I use. So it's an alternative one.
It's a Sarah glossary.
We need one. High cotton.
But then everything falls apart, and it's like, so. No.
Well, the truth is that sometimes it does fall apart, that people should all go and read Father Sergius, which I think is an amazing example, not only of what we talked about earlier in terms of spiritual striving and the way that can foster a certain kind of, solipsism, but also the way in which God continues to actually love and work in those people no matter what, because those people are us. And that the cross, when it says that when Hawley quotes Corinthians and says that my strength is made perfect in weakness, and that God really, the cross is there for those who are abject, people in need. Well, then that applies to you and me, especially in and the way that these mental gymnastics kind of manifest themselves in practice. But I think that's more than enough for this installment of the Mockingcast. I wish everyone a happy and hopeful summer, and we will be back in a couple of weeks to talk more about, God's grace.
Have fun. Tan away.
Bye, y'all. Tan away. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord.